Today we are going to be looking at Lesson 39 from A Course in Miracles.
Okay.
It's titled, My Holiness is My Salvation. Ready to see where this takes us?
Always am. Especially this one, I think it's a really important one. It gets to the core.
Yeah, let's jump right in. I'll read the first part.
Okay.
If guilt is hell, what is its opposite? Like the text for which this workbook is written, the ideas which are used for these exercises are very simple, very clear, and totally unambiguous. We're not concerned with intellectual feats nor logical playthings. We are dealing only in the very obvious, which has been overlooked in the clouds of complexity in which you think.
Yeah. You know, I love how direct and simple it is. It really cuts through all the mental clutter.
It does. It really challenges us to examine our thinking. So what comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase, guilt is hell?
Well, I think about how much energy we waste, dwelling in the past, replaying mistakes, holding on to resentment.
Right.
It's like we're choosing to suffer.
Yeah. And the lesson points out that if we truly believe that guilt was hell,
Right.
we wouldn't hesitate to seek its opposite.
Yeah.
So here's the next part. But do you believe that guilt is hell? If you did, you would see at once how direct and simple the text is, and you would not need a workbook at all. No one needs practice to gain what is already his.
That's a good point. If we already knew the answer deep down, would we need all these lessons and exercises?
Right.
Probably not.
It suggests maybe we're not as convinced as we think we are
Right.
about the pain of guilt. So if guilt is hell, what is its opposite?
Right.
The lesson states, we have already said that your holiness is the salvation of the world. What about your own salvation? You cannot give what you do not have. A Savior must be saved. How else can he teach salvation? Today's exercises will apply to you alone, recognizing that your salvation is crucial to the salvation of the world. As you apply the exercises to your own world, the whole world stands to benefit.
That idea that our personal salvation is connected to the world's salvation. Yeah.
Really intriguing.
It is. It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Our individual healing can create positive change outwards. So now here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Your holiness is the answer to every question that was ever asked, is being asked now, or will be asked in the future. Your holiness means the end of guilt and thus the end of hell. Your holiness is the salvation of the world and your own. How could you, to whom your holiness belongs, be excluded from it? God does not know unholiness. Can it be? He does not know his son.
Wow, this section, really elevates that whole concept of holiness. It's not just about being good.
Right.
It's presented as the solution to everything.
Yeah, and it connects back to our true nature, our inherent connection to something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, that reminder that we are fundamentally good, despite the mistakes we make or the negative thoughts we have.
Right. Okay, so the lesson sets up these big ideas about guilt and holiness, but then it gets really practical.
Outlining specific exercises.
Oh.
And here's what it says. A full 5 minutes are urged for the 4 longer practice periods for today, and longer and more frequent practice sessions are encouraged. If you want to exceed the minimum requirements, more rather than longer sessions are recommended, although both are encouraged. Begin the practice periods as usual by repeating today's idea to yourself. Then, with closed eyes, search out your unloving thoughts in whatever form they appear. Uneasiness, depression, anger, fear, worry, attack, insecurity, and so on. Whatever form they take, they are unloving and therefore fearful. And so it is from them that you need to be saved.
So interesting how it emphasizes consistency, but also allows for flexibility.
Right.
In our practice.
It seems to recognize that we all have, different rhythms and capacities for concentration.
Yeah.
What stands out to you about those instructions?
Well, it's interesting how it just focuses on noticing those unloving thoughts without judgment. It doesn't say to fight them or push them away, just to observe them.
Right. And it says specific situations, events, or personalities you associate with unloving thoughts of any kind are suitable subjects for today's exercises. It is imperative for your own salvation that you see them differently. And it is your blessing on them that will save you and give you vision.
So it seems like this is where the real work begins,
Yeah.
Shifting our perception, extending forgiveness.
We are running out of time for this part of our exploration. Let's pause here.
Okay.
And pick up with the next section in part 2.
That's good to me.
Okay.
We've got a lot more to unpack.
We do.
Yeah.
All right.
Picking up where we left off, let's look at how the lesson guides us in applying this idea of holiness to our unloving thoughts.
Right. It gives us very specific instructions, so I'll read that section now.
Slowly, without conscious selection, and without undue emphasis on anyone in particular. Search your mind for every thought that stands between you and your salvation. Apply the idea for today to each of them in this way. My unloving thoughts about blank are keeping me in hell. My holiness is my salvation.
The wording is so deliberate. It almost feels like a formula for shifting our perspective. It does right. And it continues. You may find these sessions easier if you intersperse the applications with several short periods during which you merely repeat today's idea to yourself slowly a few times. You may also find it helpful to include a few short intervals in which you just relax and do not seem to be thinking of anything. Sustained concentration is very difficult at first. It will become much easier as your mind becomes more disciplined and less distractible. Meanwhile, you should feel free to introduce variety into your application periods, in whatever form appeals to you. Do not, however, change the idea itself in varying the method of applying it. However you elect to use it, the idea must be stated so that its meaning remains that your holiness is your salvation. End each practice period by repeating the idea in its original form once more and adding, if guilt is hell, what is its opposite?
Yeah, there's a lot of compassion, I think, built into these instructions. It acknowledges the challenges of quieting the mind, and it really encourages us to find what works best for us.
Right. I appreciate that it doesn't set, rigid rules, but rather a framework for exploration.
Yeah. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Right. So the lesson then shifts to shorter applications throughout the day.
Okay.
So here's that section. In the shorter applications, which should be made some 3 or 4 times an hour and more if possible, you may ask yourself this question. Repeat today's idea, or preferably both. If temptations arise, a particularly helpful form of the idea is, my holiness is my salvation from this.
This seems especially relevant for, those everyday moments when we're triggered or tempted to react in those habitual, unloving ways.
Yeah, it's like having a tool to interrupt those automatic negative thought patterns.
Right. Instead of getting swept away by, anger or frustration, we can pause and choose a different response.
Right. Have you found those shorter applications helpful in your own life?
There have been times when I've felt myself getting impatient or judgmental, and remembering that phrase, my holiness is my salvation from this, has really helped me to kind of step back and regain my composure.
Yeah, it's like a little reminder of our true nature.
It is.
The way to reconnect with that inner peace.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to remember to do it.
Right.
In the heat of the moment.
Of course, that's where practice comes in, right?
It is.
The more we integrate these teachings into our daily lives, the more natural it becomes to respond from that place of holiness.
I think that's a key takeaway from this lesson. It's not just about intellectual understanding, but about really embodying these principles in our thoughts, words, and actions.
So how can we bridge that gap between theory and practice? How do we take these profound ideas and make them real in our lives?
Well, I think one way is to start small.
Okay.
Choose one specific unloving thought pattern to focus on. Maybe it's impatience or self-criticism.
Right. Pick something that you encounter frequently.
Exactly. And then whenever you notice that thought arising, just gently remind yourself, my holiness is my salvation from this.
It sounds so simple.
Yeah.
But I can imagine it takes a lot of discipline and self-awareness.
It does. But even small shifts in perspective, I think, can have a ripple effect over time.
Yeah. It's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
Right. The more we exercise it,
right,
stronger it becomes.
Exactly. And as we become more consistent with these practices, we may start to notice subtle but profound changes, in our experience of the world.
Right. I'm curious to hear about some of the, real world applications you've encountered.
Yeah.
How have these teachings impacted your interactions with others?
Well, one example that comes to mind is in my relationships.
Okay.
I used to get easily frustrated with people who didn't meet my expectations.
Sure. Something we can all relate to.
Oh, absolutely. But as I started to apply, the principles of forgiveness and seeing things differently, I began to approach those situations with more compassion and understanding.
Can you give me a specific example?
Sure. Let's say I had a friend who was constantly canceling plans.
Oh.
It used to drive me crazy. I would feel hurt and resentful.
It's easy to personalize those kinds of actions.
Right. But then I started to ask myself, well, what might be going on in their life that's causing them to behave this way? Maybe they're struggling with something I'm not aware of.
So you shifted your focus from judgment to curiosity.
Exactly. And that simple shift allowed me to approach the situation with more empathy and understanding.
Mm.
So instead of reacting with anger or frustration,
Right.
I was able to have a compassionate conversation with my friend.
Right.
And we were able to work through the issue.
That's a great example of how these teachings can help us to navigate those challenging interpersonal dynamics.
It is, and it's not always easy.
Of course.
It takes practice and a willingness to look at ourselves honestly.
I think that's a great point to transition to the final part of our exploration.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to discuss.
I agree. Let's continue this conversation in part 3. So as we move into this final part of our exploration, I'm struck by how practical and applicable these teachings are.
Yeah, me too. It's easy to get lost in those abstract concepts.
Right.
But the lesson keeps bringing us back to real life experiences.
It does. And it encourages us to experiment, find what works best for us.
Right.
In integrating these ideas into our daily life.
Speaking of real life application,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about your personal experiences with the Course.
Mm-hmm.
How have these teachings impacted your own journey?
Well, one of the most significant changes I've noticed is in my relationship with fear.
Okay.
I used to be very anxious and worried all the time.
Fear is definitely a universal human experience.
It is. And for me, it manifested in a lot of different ways. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown.
Yeah, it can be so debilitating.
It was for me. It kept me from pursuing my dreams and living my life to the fullest.
So how did A Course in Miracles help you to overcome these fears?
Well, it taught me to question my thoughts,
Okay.
to look at them with a more discerning eye.
So instead of just accepting those fearful thoughts as truth,
Right.
you started to challenge them.
Exactly. I began to recognize that my thoughts were not always accurate reflections of reality.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It was. And it allowed me to start choosing different thought. They're thoughts that were more aligned with love and peace.
And how did that impact your experience of fear?
It gradually diminished. It didn't happen overnight.
Right.
But as I continued to practice these principles, I found that fear had less and less power over me.
That's really inspiring.
Yeah.
It gives me hope that it's possible to break free from those limiting beliefs.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not about eliminating fear altogether,
Right.
but about learning to relate to it differently.
So instead of letting fear control you,
Right.
you're choosing to respond to it with more awareness and compassion.
That's goal.
I think that's a valuable takeaway for all of us. It's a reminder that we have the power to choose our thoughts
Yeah.
and that our thoughts create our reality.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the central message of this lesson. My holiness is my salvation.
Yeah, by recognizing our inherent worthiness, our connection to something greater than ourselves, we can liberate ourselves from the grip of fear, guilt, and all the other unloving thoughts that keep us trapped in suffering.
It's a journey of self-discovery, a process of awakening to our true nature.
And it's a journey we can all take,
Yeah.
regardless of our background or beliefs.
That's the beauty of A Course in Miracles. It offers a path to peace and healing that is available to everyone.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to explore A Course in Miracles for yourself and see where it takes you. It's a profound journey of transformation that can lead to a more fulfilling and joyful life.
It's a gift that keeps on giving.
May you find peace and healing on your journey.
I woke up to a miracle today.